The dojo went silent the moment the challenge was issued. 3 seconds. That's all it would take for everything Bruce Lee had built. His reputation, his philosophy, his life's work to either be validated or destroyed in front of 50 witnesses. Los Angeles, 1964. Chinatown. The air inside the makeshift training hall smelled of old wood, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of tiger balm. Bruce Lee stood barefoot on worn floorboards, 23 years old, 5'7", 135 pounds of coiled precision. He wore simple black cotton pants and a white undershirt that clung to his frame. Dark hair swept back. His body relaxed in a way that made experienced fighters nervous. Around him, students sat cross-legged along the walls, their breathing shallow, their eyes wide. They had been drilling forms when the stranger walked in. The man was enormous. 6'2", 240 pounds of muscle layered thick across his shoulders and chest. He wore a pristine white GI with a black belt knotted at his waist, the fabric crisp and ceremonial. His face was angular and hard, his jaw set with the confidence of someone who had never lost. Japanese-American mid-30s, with the bearing of a man who believed his credentials were unquestionable. He had trained in traditional karate for 15 years under some of the most respected masters in Japan. He had competed, he had won, and he had come here today because he had heard something that offended him deeply. Bruce Lee was teaching Chinese kung fu to non-Chinese students, to white students, to anyone who wanted to learn. This violated everything the stranger believed about martial arts, about tradition, about respect, about the sacred nature of knowledge passed down through bloodlines and cultural heritage. He had not come to learn. He had not come to understand. He had come to prove a point. "You dishonor the martial arts," the stranger said, his voice deep and carrying. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Bruce turned slowly, his expression calm, his dark eyes measuring. He did not speak immediately. He watched the man's stance, the tension in his shoulders, the slight forward lean that indicated aggression, barely held in check. "How so?" Bruce asked quietly. His voice was gentle, almost conversational, with the faint accent of someone who had learned English as a teenager. But beneath the gentleness was something else, something like bedrock. "You teach outsiders." The stranger gestured toward the students along the walls. White faces, black faces, Latino faces, all watching with a mixture of fear and fascination. "This knowledge is not theirs to have. You cheapen it, you make it common." Bruce tilted his head slightly, still watching, still measuring. Around the room, his students held their breath. They had seen their teacher move, had felt the explosive speed of his strikes, had witnessed the way he could redirect force with minimal effort, but they had never seen him challenged like this. Not by someone who radiated this much physical threat. "I teach those who seek to learn," Bruce said. "Knowledge has no race. Wisdom belongs to anyone humble enough to pursue it." The stranger's jaw tightened, a vein pulsed at his temple. "You speak of humility, but you show none. You parade yourself as some kind of revolutionary, but you are simply a traitor to tradition, to honor." The room felt smaller suddenly, hotter. The students shifted slightly, unconsciously leaning away from the center of the room where the two men faced each other. Outside, the sounds of Chinatown filtered through the thin walls. Car horns, vendors shouting in Cantonese, the clatter of dishes from the restaurant below. Inside, there was only tension thick enough to choke on. Bruce took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling with deliberate control. When he spoke again, his voice remained calm, but something had shifted. "If you disagree with my methods, you're welcome to leave. But if you've come here to test me, to prove something to yourself or others, then speak plainly. Don't hide behind philosophy you don't truly understand." The stranger's face flushed dark red, his hands curled into fists at his sides, the knuckles whitening. "I challenge you publicly, right now. When I defeat you, you will close this school. You will stop teaching. You will admit that your way is wrong." A ripple moved through the watching students. Some looked terrified, others looked sick. One young white man, barely 20, with sandy hair and freckles, started to stand as if to protest. But an older Chinese student grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. The message was clear: do not interfere. Bruce studied the stranger for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, a small movement of acknowledgement. "If that's what you need," he said softly, "then that's what we'll do." He walked to the center of the floor, his bare feet silent on the wood. The stranger followed, his heavier frame making the boards creak beneath his weight. They stood 10 feet apart. The students scrambled back further, pressing themselves against the walls, creating a rough circle of empty space. "Traditional challenge rules," the stranger announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. First to yield or be unable to continue loses. No rules otherwise. His voice carried the ring of formal declaration, as if he were making this official, making it real in a way that could not be taken back. Bruce said nothing. He simply stood there, feet shoulder-width apart, hands hanging loosely at his sides. He did not take a fighting stance. He did not raise his guard. He looked almost casual, almost bored, except for his eyes. His eyes were absolutely focused, tracking every micro-movement of his opponent's body, the shift of weight, the tension patterns across the shoulders, the rate of breathing. The stranger dropped into a deep karate stance, weight distributed evenly, hands up in a classical guard position. His form was textbook perfect, the product of thousands of hours of drilling. He looked powerful, immovable, dangerous. And Bruce still did not move. Defend yourself. The stranger barked, his patience fraying. I don't need to defend, Bruce said quietly. You want to strike me? Strike me. I'm giving you the first move free. No counter, no block. Hit me however you want. The room went completely silent. Even the ambient noise from outside seemed to fade. The students stared, their faces slack with shock. What was he doing? Was this suicide? Arrogance. Some kind of strategy they couldn't comprehend. The stranger's eyes narrowed with suspicion. You mock me. I'm offering you what you came for, Bruce replied. His voice still that same gentle, almost detached tone. You came to prove traditional martial arts superior. So prove it. Strike first. Show everyone here what 15 years of traditional training can do against someone you believe is wrong. It was a trap, but not the kind the stranger could identify. Not a physical trap, a psychological one. Bruce was giving him exactly what he claimed to want, while simultaneously exposing the doubt beneath. The aggression. If the stranger struck an undefended opponent, what did that prove? If he refused, he looked afraid. Either way, the moral ground was shifting beneath his feet, but he was too angry to see it, too invested in his own righteousness. Fine, the stranger spat. When you're broken on this floor, remember, you asked for this. He exploded forward with shocking speed for a man his size, his right fist launching toward Bruce's face with the full rotational force of his hips and shoulders behind it. It was a perfect reverse punch, technically flawless. Delivered with enough power to shatter bone, the kind of strike that had won him tournaments, the kind of strike that had put other men in hospitals. Bruce did not move. Not his feet, not his hands, not his body. He moved his head, 3 inches to the left. Minimal, efficient. The massive fist passed through the space where his face had been a fraction of a second earlier, missing by a hair's breadth. The stranger's entire body weight was committed to the strike, his momentum carrying him forward, his shoulder extending fully, his center of gravity shifting dangerously forward. And in that microsecond of overextension, Bruce moved. Not with a strike, not with a kick. He simply placed his left hand against the stranger's extended right shoulder, gentle, almost a touch, and pushed. Not hard, not violently, just a small, precise redirection of the force the stranger had already generated himself. The effect was catastrophic. The stranger's own momentum, combined with the loss of structural support in his overextended position, sent his shoulder joint past its natural range of motion. There was a sound, wet, grinding, wrong, that echoed through the silent dojo. A pop, followed by a grinding crunch that made several students gasp audibly. The stranger's face went white, then gray, his eyes bulged, his mouth opening in a soundless scream as his right arm fell, uselessly to his side, hanging at an unnatural angle. He staggered, his legs suddenly unreliable, his entire body trying to process the fact that his shoulder had just dislocated itself, not from Bruce's attack, from his own force turned against him. Bruce caught him before he fell, his hands gentle on the man's uninjured shoulder and back, lowering him carefully to the floor. The stranger sat there, his face twisted in agony, sweat instantly soaking through his pristine white GI. His right arm dangled grotesquely, the shoulder joint visibly out of place beneath the fabric. Breathe, Bruce said softly, kneeling beside him. Slow breaths. The pain is intense right now, but it will pass. The stranger tried to speak, but only a choked sound emerged. Tears streamed down his face, not just from physical pain, but from something deeper. Humiliation. Disbelief. The shattering of every assumption he had carried into this room. Bruce looked up at his students. Someone call an ambulance, now. The sandy-haired young man scrambled to his feet and ran for the phone in the corner. The other students remained frozen, staring at their teacher, at the injured challenger, trying to process what they had just witnessed. It had lasted less than 3 seconds, just as Bruce had known it would. Bruce turned his attention back to the stranger, his voice low and private now, meant only for the injured man's ears. You came here believing strength is about domination, about forcing others to submit, about proving your way is the only way. He paused, his dark eyes searching the stranger's face. But real strength is about understanding, about adapting, about using the minimum force necessary. I didn't hurt you. You hurt yourself. Your own aggression, your own rigidity, your own unwillingness to adapt, that's what dislocated your shoulder. The stranger's breath came in ragged gasps. He stared at Bruce with wide, uncomprehending eyes. How? You committed fully to a single strike against an undefended target, Bruce explained, his tone patient, almost professorial. Your entire body weight moved forward with your punch. When I moved my head and redirected your shoulder, your momentum had nowhere to go except into your own joint. Basic physics? Your 15 years of training taught you perfect form, but not adaptability. Not economy of motion. Not how to fight someone who doesn't follow the script you've memorized. Silence filled the space between them, broken only by the stranger's labored breathing and the distant wail of an approaching siren. The other students remained pressed against the walls, witnesses to something they would tell and retell for the rest of their lives. Why? The stranger finally managed, his voice hoarse with pain. Why didn't you hit me? Humiliate me? You could have… What would that teach you? Bruce asked gently. That I'm strong? That I can hurt you? You already believed I was dangerous, that's why you came here ready for violence. Breaking you further would only confirm your view of the world, where the strong destroy the weak, where conflict ends in domination. He sat back on his heels, his expression thoughtful. I want you to learn something different. I want you to understand that the martial arts aren't about who can hit harder or who has the most traditional lineage. They're about truth, about what actually works, about wisdom that transcends style and culture and ego. The stranger's face crumpled, fresh tears cutting tracks through the sweat on his cheeks. I was so sure, he whispered, so certain that I was right, that you were wrong, that tradition was everything. Tradition is important, Bruce said. It's where we start. It's the foundation, but it's not where we end. Water doesn't cling to tradition, it adapts to whatever container holds it. Whatever obstacle blocks it, whatever temperature surrounds it. That's what I teach. Not Chinese Kung Fu, not Japanese karate, not any single style. I teach people to be like water, to be flexible, to be honest about what works and what doesn't. The ambulance siren grew louder, pulling up outside the building. Footsteps thundered on the stairs. Two paramedics burst into the room, taking in the scene with professional efficiency, the injured man on the floor. The calm teacher beside him, the shocked students around the perimeter. Dislocated shoulder, Bruce told them, standing and stepping back to give them room to work. Happened about 5 minutes ago. He's coherent, no head trauma, just the joint injury. The paramedics moved in with practiced precision, stabilizing the stranger's arm, asking him questions to assess his condition. Bruce watched for a moment, then turned to his students, who still looked stunned. Class is over for today, he said quietly. Go home. Think about what you saw. Really think about it. Don't just remember the technique or the outcome. Think about why it happened. Think about what it means. They began to move slowly, gathering their belongings, but none of them left immediately. They lingered, casting glances at Bruce, at the injured stranger being carefully lifted onto a stretcher. The sandy-haired young man approached Bruce hesitantly. Sifu, he said, using the Cantonese term for teacher, was that really self-defense? He attacked you, but… He attacked his own assumptions, Bruce replied. I just showed him the truth. He wasn't ready to see. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their own choices, without adding your own violence to the equation. He came here ready to destroy me. I gave him the opportunity to see that destruction isn't strength. Control is strength. Understanding is strength. Mercy is strength. The young man nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes, a understanding beginning to take root. The paramedics maneuvered the stretcher toward the door. As they passed Bruce, the stranger turned his head, his face still pale and drawn with pain, but something else visible now too. Something like clarity beginning to break through the shock. Wait, he said hoarsely. The paramedics paused. The stranger looked at Bruce, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time without the filter of prejudice and assumption. Will you? Could I? After I heal? Could I come back, not to challenge, to learn? The room held its collective breath. Bruce was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. When your shoulder is healed, when you're ready to leave your certainty at the door, when you can be humble enough to admit you don't know everything, then yes, you can come back. The stranger's eyes closed, fresh tears squeezing out from beneath the lids. Not tears of pain this time. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of something breaking open inside him that had been locked tight for 35 years. The paramedics carried him out. The students gradually filtered away, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. Soon, Bruce was alone in the dojo, the afternoon light slanting through the high windows, dust motes drifting in the golden beams. He stood in the center of the floor, in the exact spot where the confrontation had occurred, and closed his eyes. He thought about the man who had challenged him, about the fear and rage and desperate need to be right that had driven him to violence, about how close the human heart always is to breaking, and how close to healing if given the chance, about how easy it would have been to humiliate him completely, to destroy him physically and emotionally, to make him an example and a warning, about how much harder it was to show restraint, to teach instead of punish, to offer a path forward instead of just proving dominance. 3 months later, on a cool evening in early spring, the dojo door opened quietly. Bruce looked up from instructing a new student in the basic principles of centerline theory. In the doorway stood the stranger. He looked different, smaller somehow, though his physical size hadn't changed. His white gi was gone, replaced by simple gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. His right arm moved stiffly, still recovering. The shoulder joint healed but not yet at full strength. His face, once hard with certainty, now carried lines of uncertainty, of humility, of openness. Bruce gestured for him to come in. The man walked slowly into the space, his eyes taking in the students, still the same mix of faces and backgrounds that had offended him so deeply before, but now he saw them differently, saw their focus, their dedication, their respect for their teacher and for each other. "I don't know if you remember me," the man began, his voice uncertain. "I remember," Bruce said simply. "Your shoulder, better still weak, but the doctors say it will fully recover. 6 more weeks of physical therapy." The man hesitated, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. "I've thought about that day every single day since it happened, replayed it 1,000 times, and I understand now what you were trying to show me. It wasn't about defeating me, it was about defeating my ignorance." Bruce nodded slowly. "What's your name?" "Robert. Robert Tanaka." "Robert, why do you want to be here?" Robert took a shaky breath, his eyes glistening slightly in the dim light. "Because I've spent 15 years learning how to fight, but I never learned how to think. I learned forms, techniques, traditions. I learned to respect my teachers and my lineage, but I never learned to question, to adapt, to see past the boundaries of style and culture. And when I met you, when I challenged you, I was so certain that my way was the only way, so certain that I was defending something sacred, but all I was really defending was my own fear, my own rigidity, my own inability to grow." The other students had stopped training, listening to this confession with rapt attention. Bruce glanced at them, then back at Robert. "And now? Now I want to learn what you tried to teach me that day. I want to understand how you saw through me so completely, how you used my own force against me, without anger, without cruelty, how you showed mercy when you could have shown dominance. I want," he paused, struggling with the words, "I want to be like water." Bruce was quiet for a long moment, studying the man before him, seeing past the physical form to the internal transformation that had occurred, seeing the humility that had replaced arrogance, the openness that had replaced certainty, the genuine desire to learn that had replaced the need to prove. "Being like water isn't a technique," Bruce said finally. "It's a way of seeing the world. It means letting go of fixed positions. It means adapting to reality instead of forcing reality to adapt to you. It means being soft enough to flow around obstacles and strong enough to wear away stone. It means understanding that the space between opposing ideas is where truth lives, not in the extremes of absolute certainty." Robert nodded slowly, absorbing each word as if it were precious. "I understand, or I'm beginning to. Will you teach me?" "I'll teach anyone who comes to learn with humility and genuine curiosity," Bruce replied. "But understand, this isn't easy. You'll have to unlearn many things you've been taught. You'll have to question assumptions you've held since childhood. You'll have to be willing to be wrong, again and again, until you start to be right." "I'm ready," Robert said. And there was no bravado in his voice now, only sincerity, only the quiet determination of someone who had seen their own limitations and chosen growth over comfort. Bruce extended his hand. Robert took it, and they shook, not as opponents, not as representatives of competing traditions, but as teacher and student, as two human beings connected by the universal journey from ignorance toward understanding. "Find a spot along the wall," Bruce said. "Watch today, learn the rhythm of how we practice. Tomorrow will begin your real training." Robert moved to sit with the other students, his movements careful because of his still healing shoulder, but his face held something it hadn't held in years, maybe in his entire life. Peace. The peace that comes from surrendering the exhausting burden of always needing to be right. Years later, Robert Tanaka would become one of Bruce Lee's most dedicated students. He would train in Jeet Kune Do with the same intensity he had once trained in traditional karate. But with a completely different mindset, he would learn to question, to experiment, to discard what didn't work, and embrace what did, regardless of where it came from. He would eventually open his own school, teaching a hybrid approach that honored tradition while refusing to be imprisoned by it. And he would tell the story of his first encounter with Bruce Lee to every new student who walked through his door. Not as a story of his own defeat, but as a story of his liberation. The day he learned that being wrong was the first step toward being wise. The day his shoulder dislocated and his mind opened. The day he struck first and discovered that the real opponent had always been his own rigidity. But the story didn't end with Robert. It rippled outward, as all true lessons do. The students who witnessed that confrontation told others. Robert's own students heard it and passed it on. Each retelling carried the same essential truth, that strength without wisdom is just violence. That tradition without adaptation is just stagnation. That certainty without humility is just ignorance wearing indifferent. Mosque. Decades after Bruce Lee's death, martial artists around the world still study that moment, still analyze the biomechanics of how a dislocated shoulder can teach more than 1,000 victories, still grapple with the profound simplicity of letting your opponent defeat themselves instead of adding your own force to their destruction. Because that's what real mastery looks like. Not the flashy techniques or the tournament trophies or the impressive demonstrations. Real mastery is knowing when not to strike, when to step aside, when to let physics and momentum and natural consequences do the teaching while you simply hold space for the lesson to land. Real mastery is understanding that you don't need to destroy your enemies. You can transform them into students, into allies, into better versions of themselves. And in doing so, you don't diminish them, you elevate them, you give them something more valuable than defeat, you give them growth. But here's the question that matters, the question that turns this from ancient history into present reality. Who in your life have you been the challenger toward? Who have you approached with absolute certainty, ready to prove them wrong, ready to dominate the conversation, ready to win at any cost? And what did you learn when they showed you grace instead of destruction? Or worse? What if you've never experienced that grace? What if everyone you've challenged has met you with equal aggression, confirming your belief that the world is a battleground, and the strongest survive? What if no one has ever loved you enough to show you a better way? Who are you when you win an argument? When you're proven right? When you have someone at a disadvantage, do you press harder, drive the point home, make sure they know they've lost? Or do you offer them a way to save face, to learn, to grow? Do you strike first, or do you give them space to see their own error? Because Bruce Lee could have humiliated Robert Tanaka, could have beaten him unconscious, could have made him a cautionary tale whispered in martial arts circles for decades, could have taken that moment of vulnerability and crushed it into dust, proving his superiority beyond any shadow of doubt. But he didn't. He chose differently. He chose to teach. He chose to elevate. He chose to turn an enemy into a student and a student into a teacher who would carry that lesson forward. And that choice, that moment of restraint and wisdom in the face of aggression and ignorance, created ripples that are still spreading today, still teaching, still transforming people who hear the story and recognize themselves in it, still asking the question that matters most. When you have power over someone, what do you do with it? 3 seconds. That's how long it took for a shoulder to dislocate and a life to change direction. That's how long it takes for force to meet wisdom and discover which one actually prevails. That's how long it takes to prove that the most devastating technique isn't a strike at all. It's mercy. It's restraint. It's the conscious choice to teach instead of destroy. It's the understanding that real strength isn't about how much damage you can inflict, but how much growth you can inspire. 3 seconds to dislocate a shoulder, a lifetime to heal a mind, and generations to prove that the lesson was worth learning. That's what Bruce Lee understood that day in a small dojo in Los Angeles, Chinatown. That's what Robert Tanaka learned through pain and humility. And that's what the story still teaches anyone wise enough to listen. The person who strikes first doesn't always win. Sometimes they just reveal who they really are beneath all the certainty and tradition and fear. And sometimes, if they're very lucky, someone shows them grace instead of giving them what they deserve, shows them a mirror instead of a fist, shows them possibility instead of defeat. That's not just martial arts. That's being human at the highest level. That's what it means to be like water, to flow around the obstacle, to adapt to the container, to be soft enough to nurture and strong enough to shape mountains over time. 3 seconds, one dislocated shoulder, one transformed wife, one lesson that echoes across generations. How will you use your 3 seconds when they come?